Boston was sinking deeper into winter. Snow piled high on the brick steps of old apartment buildings. Inside a top-floor studio, Rachel Warren, age 27, typed the final lines of a freelance article titled, "How to Save Power on a Low Income." The desk was cluttered with unpaid bills, a cup of cold tea, and a generic bottle of medication one for her mother Claire, who lay half awake in the corner bed, coughing softly beneath a fraying blanket. The wind howled against the windows, making the old frames groan. Rachel reached to shut her laptop when a knock echoed at the door, soft, steady, but confident. She glanced at her mother, then pulled on a faded sweater and opened the door. A tall man in a dark wool coat stood in the hallway. His hair was pure white, his face pale but not elderly. He looked like he had stepped out of an old oil painting, timeless, composed, unreadable. "Miss Rachel Warren?" he asked, voice low and smooth. "Yes, my name is Julian Cross. I have a proposal that concerns the future of you and your mother." Rachel froze slightly. Her hand tightened on the doorframe. "Who are you?" He held out a card with crisp serif lettering. "Julian Cross, Crosswell Senior Care Foundation. I know your mother needs urgent care. I can help." "How do you know that? Are you following me?" "No," Julian replied calmly. "I observe. I help those who deserve it." Rachel hesitated. "Help? How?" "By becoming my wife." The words dropped into the silence like a stone into deep water. Rachel stood still, unsure if she had heard him correctly. A gust of wind swept through the hallway. Behind her, the curtains shifted and her mother coughed again. Rachel sat on the city bench across from the courthouse, hands trembling beneath her gloves. The marriage license in her bag felt heavier than anything she had ever carried. Julian Cross had offered no romance, no grand gestures, only terms. He would provide full medical care for her mother at one of Boston's most prestigious private clinics. Rachel would live in his penthouse for exactly 1 year. No physical expectations, no public appearances, no emotional obligations. Just a legal union on paper. Rachel had signed. It was the coldest January morning in a decade. Inside the courthouse, Julian wore the same black coat. He said little, not even when the clerk asked if either of them wanted to exchange personal vows. Rachel had just shaken her head numb. They left in separate cars. She didn't move into a mansion or a brownstone. Instead, Julian had an entire floor of a historic hotel downtown. Apartment 1408, he called it. She found the name odd, like something out of a ghost story, but said nothing. The place was pristine, minimalist furniture, quiet halls, and one rule: do not open the locked room at the end of the hall. Julian handed her a single brass key. "It opens everything except that door," he said. "You'll find the essentials stocked. I'll be traveling for work. I may not return often." And with that, he was gone. Rachel stood in the foyer alone. The silence inside apartment 1408 was different from the quiet of poverty. This was the silence of secrets, of space too big for one person. The marble floors echoed her footsteps like a whisper. At night, she sometimes heard sounds from the locked room. Not screams, not voices, just movement. Soft thuds, a shuffle maybe. But when she pressed her ear to the door, it was always still. In the first few weeks, Rachel did her best to adapt. She cooked simple meals kept to herself and sent regular updates to the clinic, caring for her mother. Her mother's health had improved dramatically, more progress than in years. The nurses even said she smiled more now. That alone made the arrangement feel worth it. Julian rarely returned. When he did, he was always impeccably dressed, quiet, and precise in his movements. He would read in the lounge, take calls behind closed doors, and retire early. They exchanged polite words over coffee. Nothing more. The emotional distance was part of the deal, but Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just emotional. It was spiritual. He was empty in a way she couldn't explain. One evening she brought him tea. "Do you ever feel lonely in a place like this?" she asked, carefully, neutral. Julian looked at her for a long moment, then answered, "I don't allow feelings to interfere with function." He thanked her for the tea and returned to his reading. Rachel returned to her room. She had expected isolation. What she hadn't expected was fear. That night, she woke to a faint tapping, a rhythmic knock like something brushing against the walls. She sat up in bed listening. The sound came from the far end of the hallway, the locked room. She tiptoed out of her room, heart pounding. The corridor was dim, lit only by the ambient glow of the city through tall windows. The tapping had stopped. She approached the locked door, placed her hand on the knob. Cold. Much colder than the rest of the apartment. Rachel. She jumped. Julian stood in the shadows behind her. "I told you never to come here," he said, his voice low but sharp. "I just heard something," she said, her voice small. "There's nothing to hear," he replied. "Stay away from this door. For your safety." Then he turned and walked away, disappearing back into the darkness like a ghost. Rachel stood alone in the hallway, her palm still tingling with the chill from the knob. She began to suspect that she had entered not a contract, but a trap. Rachel couldn't sleep. The tapping hadn't returned, but the silence was louder now, denser, as if the walls themselves were listening. She tried to focus on her freelance writing, but her mind kept drifting back to that door. What was he hiding? She never saw him enter or leave that room. Yet the air near it always felt colder, more still. One quiet afternoon, Julian left again, this time for a full week-long trip, according to a note on the dining table. That same evening, Rachel wandered the apartment restlessly. She passed the grand hallway mirror and stopped. Something had changed. There was a faint glint behind her in the reflection. She turned. The office door was slightly ajar. Rachel hesitated, then stepped inside. It was the first time she'd been in this particular room. The furniture was antique, but immaculate. A single large desk, a wall of books, and one steel drawer unit stood at the far end. Drawers always drew curiosity. She opened the bottom one. Inside were old documents, legal papers, business contracts, marriage certificates. Her breath caught. 5 names. All women. All marriages to Julian Cross. All terminated. Not by divorce, by death. Each one ended with the word deceased and a date, neatly typed. No mention of cause. All within the last 12 years. Rachel's hands trembled. She took a photo of one of the certificates, her heart thudding in her ears. Suddenly the drawer slammed shut on its own. She jumped back, knocking over a glass paperweight from the desk. It shattered. That night, she didn't sleep. The tapping returned, this time more urgent. But Rachel no longer dared to approach the locked door, not after what she had seen. Julian returned earlier than expected. Rachel heard the door open late at night, no creaking, just the soft whoosh of cold air entering with him. He didn't speak, didn't call her name. She only heard his footsteps crossing the living room, and then silence. The next morning he acted as if nothing had happened, smiling, making espresso, his sleeves rolled, his cufflinks polished. "You slept well?" he asked. Rachel nodded, too afraid to lie, too afraid to speak the truth. That afternoon, while Julian took a call on the balcony, Rachel tiptoed back to the office. She had to know more. She had to find out what happened to those women. She scanned every shelf, books, binders, a locked cabinet. Then she saw it a small leather notebook wedged between two thick legal volumes. Inside were handwritten notes, not about finances or real estate. They were personal. Each entry started with a name, a woman's name, followed by impressions, notes, observations, warnings. Jessica, too curious, beautiful but restless. Danielle, gentle, asked too many questions after the 4th month. Leah, didn't listen, left early, had to be handled. Rachel's knees buckled. The last entry was just one line. Rachel, different. Observes, suspects, not yet ready. She dropped the book as if it had burned her fingers. Behind her, the faint sound of something shifting like wood scraping over wood. The far bookshelf had moved slightly, revealing a sliver of wall behind it. She approached and pushed gently. The entire unit creaked open, revealing a narrow, hidden doorway. Rachel's breath caught. She stepped inside. It was a small, windowless room. Shelves lined the walls, but not with books, with boxes, each labeled with a name. Jessica, Danielle, Leah. Others she didn't recognize. Inside the nearest box, a scarf, a dried rose, a journal. She opened the journal. It wasn't Julian's. It was Leah's. She flipped through the pages. Leah had written about feeling watched, about not being allowed to leave, about a door she was warned never to open. If something happens to me, I hope someone finds this. Rachel's tears came fast and silent. This wasn't paranoia. It was a pattern. And she was next. Rachel couldn't breathe. She left the hidden room slowly, gently closing the bookshelf behind her. Her hands shook, but her mind had never been clearer. She was living inside a pattern, a cycle dressed in elegance. Each woman had come here and vanished. And Julian. Julian was not just hiding something. He was waiting for her to become like them. Silent. Gone. She returned to her room and locked the door. Then she opened her laptop, pulled up the photos she had taken of the marriage certificates and Leah's journal. She saved them to a flash drive and hid it beneath the false bottom of a drawer. Then she wrote a message. Not to the police. She knew better. This man had resources, influence. If she disappeared, a report wouldn't be enough. She wrote to Olivia, her oldest friend, now a junior journalist in New York. Liv, if you're reading this, I need you to come to Boston. Do not call me, just come. There's a story in apartment 1408, and I think I'm next. She set the message to autosend in 72 hours if she didn't cancel it. That night, Julian knocked on her door. Would you like to join me for dinner? He asked. She hesitated, then nodded. They ate in silence. Red wine, seared salmon, candlelight. Julian finally spoke. You've been exploring. Rachel's hand froze midair. I can see it in your eyes, he said quietly. You think you've found something, but all you've found is proof that people are afraid of what they don't understand. She placed her fork down slowly. And what don't I understand? She asked. Julian stared at her. That I am not your enemy, he said. But curiosity makes people reckless, and I am tired of losing what I protect. Rachel excused herself. Her escape had to happen tonight. Midnight. Rachel stood at the edge of the living room, coat on, boots silent against the marble. She clutched her mother's insurance card and the flash drive in one pocket, her phone in the other. She had watched Julian lock his bedroom door at 11. She had memorized the rhythm of his routine. Now was her chance. She tiptoed to the elevator, but it wasn't working. The button glowed red, disabled. Her breath caught. She turned toward the stairwell, but the handle was gone, as if the door had never had one. The cold metal offered no way out. Julian had locked her in. The apartment was a cage. She backed away, heartbeat racing. Her hand brushed the hallway wall, and then she remembered the fire escape. There was one in the laundry room. She had noticed it weeks ago, but never thought much of it. She ran quiet, fast, barefoot now. She reached the laundry room and threw open the narrow window. The fire escape was slick with frost 5 stories above the alley. She climbed, step by step. Below her, the street was empty, but just as she reached the final rung, she heard it. The door behind her opened. She didn't turn around. Rachel Julian's voice called down, strangely calm. "Come back. You don't know what you're doing." She didn't answer. Instead, she dropped. Not to the ground, but onto the next roof ledge. Rolled, scraped her arm, but kept moving. Behind her, Julian didn't follow. He just watched. Rachel reached the street, blood dripping from her elbow, her lungs burning. The city still slept. No alarms, no sirens, just the distant hum of traffic and her own pulse screaming in her ears. She didn't stop running until she reached a 24-hour diner near Union Station. Inside, a young man behind the counter looked up in surprise. "You okay?" he asked. "I need to use your phone," she said, voice raw. "And I need to call someone who can make this matter." He nodded and handed her the store's landline. Rachel dialed. Not the police, but the number of a journalist she remembered from a seminar during her time at college. A woman who had once told the class, "The truth is only as powerful as the one brave enough to speak it." She explained everything. The fake names, the disappearances, the flash drive. When they met hours later in a nearby parking garage, Rachel handed over the flash drive and all the notes she had taken, every observation, every date, every odd encounter. "I don't need money," Rachel told her. "I just need this to stop, for good." Within a week, the story broke. National headlines. Real estate mogul Julian Crane tied to series of disappearances. Investigations reopened. Hidden bodies discovered. Staff members came forward. Rachel testified. She told the court how it all began with a favor, a job, a mistake she had almost let become her life. Julian was sentenced to life without parole. His empire collapsed. Rachel declined all interviews. Instead, she used the reward money and donations from victims' families to open a counseling center in Seattle, one for women who had experienced coercion, trauma, and silence. She named it Second Light. There she worked quietly, an advocate, a listener, a guide. She never returned to Los Angeles. But on one quiet afternoon, 2 years later, as she sat on the center's back porch, a man approached. He wore glasses, carried a notebook. He smiled gently. "Are you Rachel Ellis?" he asked. She hesitated. "Depends on who's asking. My name is Aaron. My sister was one of them. You helped us find the truth." Rachel said nothing. He took a deep breath. "I work in education policy, but lately I've been thinking, maybe there's something more I can do. I'd like to help if you'll let me." Rachel looked at him, truly looked, and nodded. "All right," she said. "Let's begin." Together, they walked back into the building where the lights were always left on and the doors were never locked.